Welcome to Render Time, a podcast where we dive deep into the topics for all things video. Today, we're going to be exploring the world of color grading. Whether you're a seasoned professional looking to perfect your craft or a beginner eager to learn, this episode is your go-to resource for all things color. Join us as we explore the latest techniques, industry trends, and expert tips to help you take your color grading to the next level. Let's get started. Today is not only a great topic, but this is also our second episode of Render Time. I think it's going to be so interesting to hear from the creative point of view from B2B creators. And every episode is hosted by a different creator. So we are getting a completely unique perspective each and every episode. Editors, videographers, graphic designers, and more will all be featured in Render Time. Speaking of, today I am joined by Yash and Elias. Both are video editors here at Market Scale. My name's Eric. I'm also a video editor here at Market Scale. Guys, thank you both so much for joining us today. We're talking about color grading. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Thanks.
Good. Awesome. Well, real quick, tell us just a little bit about yourself, maybe what your experience is in video editing.
Yeah, so hi guys, I am Yash Sahu. I'm from India and I have been an editor for past 3.5 years. I primarily use Premiere Pro as my go-to software for everything, but I have hands-on experience on After Effects and DaVinci Resolve.
Awesome. Elias?
I'm Elias Rodriguez. I've been editing since I was in middle school and then taking on freelance projects since then. I've used Final Cut when I was younger and then transitioned over to Adobe Premiere and After Effects when I was in college about 4 years ago. So yeah, I use now mainly the Adobe Creative Suite, and I'm a B2B contract editor for Market Scale.
Awesome. Well, I actually did the same thing. I actually started in, I think it was Final Cut 6 or 7. I don't know if you remember that, Elias, but started in that Final Cut 6 or 7, then moved to Premiere. Then obviously Final Cut X came out, and so used that some, but I also use Premiere primarily and then Final Cut here and there. What is your experience in color grading specifically? When did you really start to develop that skill? What programs do you use primarily for that? Is it different than what you maybe edit the rest of your video?
So I could start with this one. So I didn't start color grading until college. Once I started getting more into short films, because I did a lot of broadcasts in high school. So I did I would do quick edits for baseball games or football and whatnot. But then once I started getting to more of the content creation that wasn't so involved with broadcast, I started getting into it, but obviously didn't understand what I was doing for the first 3 years until I watched enough tutorials. But yeah, predominantly Premiere is what I do it on, even though I know Resolve.
Yeah. What tutorials, Elias, do you watch? Is there a certain channel on YouTube? Were you using YouTube? Were you using a different subscription software? What were you using to train and learn how to color grade?
Definitely. So I would say self-taught. I had a year of film school in college, but
yeah,
I did film all throughout high school. But just my YouTube algorithm has been made into a place where it's really easy for me to find tutorials on things.
What about you, Yash?
Yeah, so when I first started editing, I always had interest in how the colors play effect on our minds. So I was always very keen towards how to make my footage in such a way that if I showcase a particular bandwidth of color, what is it that's gonna convey to your mind? So I started off color grading by watching movies. If I have to name,
Interesting.
yeah, if I have to name some, I would say it would be Transformers. And yeah, I
Nice.
mean, that's a very natural cinematic color grade, but
Yeah.
I do like that a lot. And the usage of anamorphic lens and everything.
Were you trying to match to Transformers in a way, like your footage kind of match that color grading?
Well, actually, I saw the footage of Transformer and it wasn't in my mind that I have to recreate the whole thing. But definitely, I wanted to do something similar to that.
Okay.
Obviously, I knew at that stage that I cannot reach that kind of professionalism that a colorist would have. But definitely, I wanted to make something out of it. And in one way or the other, I made an edit which seemed nice to me. And that
Yeah.
made me like learn more about color grading.
Color grading, in my opinion, can take a good film and make it great, and can take a great film, if it's done poorly, color grading, into just a good film. I think it's that important because it's what you're ingesting. It's what you're looking at the entire time is the color.
Can I add something real quick to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So like just following up on what you said about making a bad movie like good. I feel like Nicholas Winding Refn, I don't know if he made Drive, but he also made this movie called Only God Forgives. And
Mhm.
like the color grade in that movie makes that movie like absolutely gorgeous, but it's like the most slow, drawn out movie you'll ever see in your life. So I think like the color grade just has like such a huge impact on like what
Yeah.
you could perceive as art.
What is your workflow typically when you color grade? Is there a certain time of your edit that you begin to color grade? Is it at the end? Is it at the beginning? Does it depend on the project?
So when I started off my hands with color grading, I used to do it with like in the beginning. If I drag and drop a clip in my timeline, I used to color grade it at the real time. But
Hmm.
eventually, what I understood was if I do everything from scratch from the beginning, and in the end, if the client wants to make a change, or if I have a creative decision that I want to change a footage because I found something better somewhere else.
Yeah, I actually do the same. I typically color grade at the very end because you never know what you're going to need to fix throughout the film or throughout the video or throughout anything that you're working on. Elias, what about you?
Yeah, I feel like I do like very similar to you. Like for like short films, weddings,
Mm,
stuff like that, I do
yeah.
my color grade at the end. But podcasts, like especially with Autopod, like before Autopod, I would still wait till the end. But now that I'm like, okay, this is gonna be cut up into 100 clips, which I could like control the like copy and paste my color grade onto
Yeah.
the rest of them, or I could just like initially do it. But I feel like
Yeah.
in terms of just like I feel like my computer runs better if I wait until the end. And then with
Mm,
like I have weddings sometimes that are like 500 different clips that like I'll have to like
yes.
get in. So I'm like, I'm just gonna color grade this when it's like set
You don't
together.
even know if
Have
you're
the
using the
feel.
clip at,
Yeah,
until the end. Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
100%.
Yeah. Speaking of Autopod, we use Autopod typically here at Market Scale. Elias, you want to share real quick what that is and how you color grade using that?
Yeah, so what I'll do, so Autopod allows you to basically save like 4 to 5 hours of podcast editing. It's crazy because like what
Mm,
it does is you take different podcast clips with different audio and then it'll like
different cameras. Yeah.
yeah, different
Yeah.
cameras, yeah. And it'll let you cut it all together so that you have multiple speakers. So I'll put
Mm,
the speaker with the frames and so like create like an adjustment layer and then nest those sequences together and then
mm,
I'll go into the nested sequence and then I'll color correct the actual footage that was in the nested sequence. And then I'll once I have all my nested sequences color graded and set up, then I'll use Autopod to cut them all together just to finish the edit in like an hour to like an hour 20 minutes, depending on podcast length.
No, that's something that I learned as well was the power of nesting, which not a lot of editors know this, but or even use sometimes, unfortunately, but it saves you a ton of time and you are able to make cuts and edits as you need to. All right, so now we've talked a little bit about LUTs briefly, but do you guys typically use a base LUT when you first start your color grading? So I'm not talking about a cinematic LUT. Is there a Rec 709 LUT or something like that, some sort of base LUT that you guys use when you first start your color grading?
So I mostly do my editing in Premiere Pro itself. So it has a set of built-in LUTs, which for the period of time have been working fine with me.
Yeah.
So I choose in between those 7 to 8 LUTs, which are like Alexa and Ari specific.
Elias, for you, is there a Rec 709 LUT that you start your editing with before you go into adding any other LUTs or adjustments?
So there's the settings now in Premiere, which I actually have been using, where you could adjust all your clips to Rec 709. But it doesn't. So I had a wedding that was shot on a Sony FX6, and
Yeah.
I'm looking over here because I actually have like my LUTs pulled up.
Okay.
But yeah, so I was using a neutral FX6 cube. So um usually like I've found now that I've been editing like longer, I've been using actual Rec 709 LUTs from like the Canon website or the Sony website, and it just helps with that initial base edit.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Real quick, I want us to look at a few photos just to show the viewers what Rec 709 on a initial S-Log3 or C-Log3 would look like. So real quick, guys, let's pull up the S-Log3 to Rec 709. So if, as you can see, it starts with a very flat profile. You would see this on a Blackmagic or another film camera that shoots in RAW, although it's not RAW, it still is flat, and you get that raw look so that you can be able to put a Rec 709 LUT, and it's pretty close to looking like what the intended shot is. And it's pretty close to what you would see if you were done editing, if you were done color grading, which is pretty remarkable. I want to pull up the C-Log3 to Rec 709 now. So there, as you can see, there's a C-Log in the C100 Mark II. And then when you put the Rec 709 LUT in Premiere or anywhere else, this is the outcome. And what's interesting to me is you're not having to make any sort of adjustments, even from that. You're just putting the initial LUT on. So I want to ask you guys, do you see a benefit to putting a LUT like that, a Rec 709 LUT?
I think it does depend, because for B2B, a lot of the time I feel like it can get you like all the way, if not like 95% of the way, unless like the client wants like a more, like if they want like an icy blue LUT over it for like that more corporate feel, then you could like go that route and make it a lot cleaner. But I feel like the Rec 709 LUT, it just gives you like that clean color right away. And I would highly recommend it because I didn't use it for the longest time and I didn't realize just how many hours I was wasting on not even like the fun part of color grading, which is like the actual like, okay, like let's add emotion to this with like another LUT or like by making masks and whatnot. So
yeah.
So I would agree with Elias on this, that Rec 709 saves a lot of time, especially when you're starting off with a raw footage, because first you have to color correct it and then you have to work further to grade it.
Mm-hmm.
So Rec 709 definitely, if you're doing a B2B, it for me it has 90% of the time worked almost fully for me. Like if I throw a Rec 709 on a specific camera LUT, on a specific profile, it gets me like the final output, which I don't even have to manipulate. But if I'm working for a different client, sometimes he asks for like make things a little more tint wise change or a white balance change or overall tonality change in the color profile.
I think what is also powerful about using a Rec 709 LUT is because if you look at the S log 3 and the C log 3 together side by side, you see that they're very similar in look, even though they are different cameras. They're both flat. They both have a similar look. And then whenever you put the Rec 709 LUT on there, the product comes out very natural. So speaking of editing with different cameras, is there a process that you guys use to match cameras? Obviously, we talked about the benefits of log, but what is your overall process when you are needing to match different cameras?
Comparison view is my best friend on there's a thing called I think it's HSL secondary on Premiere, and it lets you compare, because sometimes even with the Rec 709 LUT, your shot might be like a little more orange or a little more green, and then you have to like actually
depending on how the shooter shoots, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, right.
Depending on how the shooter shoots and like the camera's being used, definitely.
Yes.
So there's some times where I have to make lighter edits. Most of the time, like, and then graphs, like your histogram, like your vector scopes, all of those, which could be accessed through Lumetri scopes. If you click on window on Premiere, you could view all your graphs and actually view like the color data of each shot and then try to match it that way as well. That's like usually how I go about it.
So I do it with Lumetri scopes itself. It has worked well for me. Earlier, I used to do it like just by my eyesight, which was very wrong, which I found out way later. But now I use Lumetri scope, which is much more accurate. And since it has the color data, you cannot go wrong if you see the data in front of you.
No, those are great points. I would use my eye for a lot of it. I've been color grading for a long time. So once you have a base look that you like, or you have a color that you're comfortable with, that you like, how do you gauge how much color grading you need to do?
Color grading, I think, is an aspect where you're never satisfied. Even in the end of the video, you're like, if we had time, we would have done something better than this.
Yeah.
And that's like a never-ending loop. But what I have found a sweet spot for me is I stop when I see like some technical aspects going wrong, like when I see some banding happening, or is there's a noise created in the colors. That's where I stop.
So I feel like it depends on the project, because there's like as an editor, I feel like you always kind of have to gauge your value as well. Just because like if you're getting $50 for a project, you probably don't want to spend like 8 hours on it unless maybe you deem like, oh, this is a portfolio piece. So I gauge it based off that a lot. Like, is this going to be a portfolio piece? If not, if it is going to be a portfolio piece, I go pretty. I would say like I look at each shot and I'm like, what needs to be like, what information is the viewer expressing here? And then dependent on that, or what information is the viewer supposed to gather here? And then depending on that information, I'll create the colors. So maybe I'll do like, if there's a speaker, I'll create a mask for the background. So I have a grade for the background, then I have a grade for skin tone, and then I have a smaller grades that I'll do through creating masks for certain objects that need to pop.
No, for sure. I think it's all about gauging audience. It's about gauging the footage that you have, right? An iPhone clip is going to be different than a raw Blackmagic 6K camera. So it's all about gauging that, gauging the amount of time that you have to make the project. Before you start color grading, how do you decide what look or LUT that you are going to want to use on your project?
So there's a lot of factors that go into that. Like, again, it all depends on the client, but like I work for this other production company doing mainly creative work, and he's pretty lax about like the grade. So then this is also why, like earlier I said, I think it's important like with more creative work to make it first, because a short film that you thought was going to end up some way might end up like completely different psychologically. So instead of using that pretty teal orange look, you might want to go just for a harsher orange look, kind of like social network type greens, like that like mechanical green. So I feel like I gauge the grade and the LUT always based upon like what the client gives me, what they want, and then the emotion that's portrayed by the end of the edit.
What about you, Yash?
Yeah, I have a very similar opinion to Elias on this. So when I color grade, I look for what is the project about and what am I creating for. And if I'm working on something which has to be like a very critics worthy, where people of the industry will watch it a lot, I tend to make sure that I make a very natural color grade there. But suppose that where I'm working for a social media ad or a creative, there maybe I would say I would go more into like some flashy, fancy color tones.
For me, I actually evaluate the footage before selecting a color grade. I will see, was it shot indoors, outdoors? And if you're using the Rec 709, you can kind of gauge how much more really needs to be done here.
Like Yash was saying, I sometimes I have like a food LUTs pack that I'll actually use for social media because it makes the colors pop extremely vibrantly, even if there's like not
Yes.
food involved. So yeah, I feel like the color grade's all dependent on material as well, or like
And you ironically, like, you get used to knowing which ones you use over time. Like, there's a bunch, but you can go through and look and be like, hey, I know I use this for this. I know I use this for this. So you could make an argument, right, that you are never done, like Yash said, color grading, because it could always be better. You could always have something that you need to improve on. When do you find yourself crossing the finish line? Is it when a client says it's good to go?
So I put a full stop on my color grade when I feel like I am done with the video as well as the client is satisfied with the outcome. It sometimes I have some creative disagreements, like I don't like something particular about the grade, but the client wants it that way. But since
Yeah.
it's his project or her project, I have to make it the way they like it.
Yep.
So the end call is always about what the client likes. But
Yeah.
definitely, I would say that project which have a more creative liberty, I go and take the upper hand and do the color grade the way I like it fully.
very similar to what Yash said. I feel like I at first always like when I feel comfortable with the grade, when I think that like this is like gonna be worthy of my client, and then whatever changes the client needs. Initial grade, like what I think is gonna look prettiest, and then second grade, whatever is gonna make the client the most satisfied. Because at the end of the day, like they're the client. Yeah.
So obviously we've all been color grading for a while. How has color grading changed in the last 5 years, and where do you see it going in the next 5 years with AI and with all of the new tools that's out there?
Just space, because like I said, it's like I started color grading like beginning of college, which was 10 years ago, and I feel like it's changed a ton. Like there's like that new settings option that Adobe just dropped where it like automatically recognizes how to turn your log footage into Rec 709. I don't think AI is ever a bad thing. Like I feel like if you're an editor and you love it and you're willing to go through with like learning, then you're always going to be fine. Especially with like color grading is probably one of the most difficult things I've learned in editing, but it's also one of the most rewarding. And once you learn it, it's a skill that like it's really hard to lose, I feel like.
I think color grade has been changed a lot over the years. Like we have seen, again, I would like to give an example of some films. Like over the time, we have seen films like The Joker and La La Land, which are very
Yeah.
intense color graded films. Those colors don't naturally look the same as we see them. But definitely, there's a very big scope to like in how much of a play range you can experiment in terms of color grade.
No, and I'm actually glad that we touched on AI, because in our very first episode of Render Time, which if you did not watch, we'll make sure to link that in the description below. Or if you're listening, make sure to tune in and listen to our first podcast of Render Time. But we talked about AI in video editing, and obviously AI has a part to play in color grading as well. And to me, in my opinion, I don't think AI is going anywhere. I think it's here to stay. I think it's the new way of working in business and marketing in any field and even Hollywood. So Yash, you already told us your favorite movie or one of your favorites for color grading. Elias, do you have a favorite movie or series of movies that you are inspired by in terms of color grading or that you just have a real affinity for?
There's a lot, but Moonrise Kingdom and just like Wes Anderson, like his teal orange, I feel like is just like it's so beautiful. Like just how he
Yeah.
makes the pastels pop. It's just such a unique grade that I feel like I've tried to imitate for like 5, 6 years now, and it's like very complex to get everything to look like that pastel-y, kind of like it looks like a painter's template. And it's like that's my goal in color grading is like if I can make something look like a painting, then I'm like, I've done something great.
Yeah, you're creating art, right? So, yeah. Yash, is there a certain director that you follow that you really like all of his movies and his color grading?
Yeah, the director was just now revealed by Elias. It's Wes Anderson, who I follow a lot.
Ah, very cool.
Uh, so he's the kind of director who has shown us a very, you know, it's like very comic bookish colors, but the stories he weave into the colors. That is like a very unique thing to experience. Like if you watch a Wes Anderson movie, the story is so emotional, so driven.
My favorite director, and it's not only for his color grading, but it's also his storytelling, and it's someone that I've followed for a long time, but that's Christopher Nolan. I love his films. They make you think, they make you need to pay attention the entire time. I love the color grading as well, and I actually try to emulate a lot of what he does as a director. All right, so last question, and this is for videographers, so hopefully there's videographers listening. What recommendations do you have for videographers or really anyone that is filming when they're shooting to make the color grading process easier for themselves or for an editor that's taking on their project?
Firstly, I would say that please shoot in RAW because that gives the editor a huge leverage,
Or
a huge
flat, right, Yash?
down
Raw or
plan.
flat?
Yeah, and that gives the editor a huge room to play with the colors. We can make
Mm.
something natural, we can make something very over the top, but at least we have the room.
Yeah, so I used to do like videography a lot, and I would say like know your camera, like understand like how to shoot in flat and log,
100%.
understand how to make sure your ISO isn't like clipping your image, like understand that that's data versus like the actual like shutter speed or like the aperture of your camera.
Know your camera, like Elias says. Anyways, thank you guys so much for joining Render Time podcast and giving your amazing insight on color grading. Both of you were fantastic. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
Thank you for having me. It's my very first podcast ever shot, and I had a lot of information which I wanted to share with people, but never really had a platform. So thank you for
Yeah.
giving that platform to me, and I hope so a lot of other editors will know about color grading and dive deeper into it and the other aspects of it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, first of all, thank you again. This is also my first podcast like this, and it was like I'm a nerd about anything editing, so talking about it's like my favorite. So thank you
Yeah.
for having us.
If you're watching this, listening to this, thank you so much for doing that. And hopefully this was insightful for you. You learned something new, whether you've been editing for years or you're just starting editing. And I just want to thank again, Elias and Yash for being here, for being a part of this podcast. And we have a bunch more podcasts to come, and you might see them again. So thank you guys for coming. We're excited for the episodes to come. Thanks for tuning in for our second episode of Render Time.